So the outline is just going to be the introduction, the brief overview of Nigeria, events of 1967, the Null curriculum, why is this important today, what next? So it has been over 50 years since the end of the Nigerian Civil War that most other people know as the Biafra War. It was one of the bloodiest conflicts in the post-colonial Africa. It was said then to be a humanitarian tragedy, the humanitarian tragedy of its time. Yet many years later, some of the issues that had set off the war still is persistent. A brief overview of Nigeria from 1914. We know 1914 was the amalgamation of the northern and the southern Nigeria. Then Lord Lugard, who was the governor of the northern and the western region, merged Nigeria and made it one country. And 46 years later, that was in 1960, Nigeria gained its independence, and in 1963, we became a republic. Nigeria is one of the largest countries in the continent of Africa. It has, is the third largest English-speaking country in Africa. It also has like the largest population in the continent, with over 250 million people. Despite the population of Nigeria, we can see that it's really diverse despite the population of Nigeria. We have over 250 languages that are being spoken currently in Nigeria, with over 750 dialects. But as at that time, before the independence, or even at the time of the independence of Nigeria, we had like three major groups: the northern part and the Fulani part dominating the northern, the Hausa and the Fulani dominating the north, the Yorubas dominating the west, and the Igbos dominating the south. But it was not long after the independence of Nigeria that this very young country felt the tension of the independence. Probably because of leadership, there were some squabbles, and in 1966, there was a coup. The events of 1966, we had like two coups, and in 1967, under the leadership of Odumegwu Ojukwu, the eastern part of Nigeria broke away from Nigeria itself, and they called themselves Biafra. With this incident, 1 month later, after that declaration, Nigerians decided to go to war with the Biafran people, led by Siakpebru. He was the current general in charge of Nigeria. So this war lasted for 3 years. The casualties from the war was over 1 million, most of them from hunger, and a lot of other atrocities happened during the war. The silent echoes of a forgotten past. Yes, the war ended in 1970. The war has been forgotten. But the truth is, there are still underlying factors, things that we know that, we sense, especially most Nigerians, those in the East, and I also believe, even though I don't know how much of research has gone into it yet, but also the Northerners too, and the whole of Nigeria feels the effect of this war, and yet it is not being taught. My question is, before I ask the question, only last week, I spoke to a professor in Nigeria, Professor Waka. He's into the history and international relationship, and I asked him about the Biafran War. And he told me that the Biafran War, even though it is not being taught, like it's a sensitive topic. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to speak about it. Nobody wants to make it part of the school curriculum. And that becomes a problem because you see the gap, that it has created such a gap in society. We can see the ripples from that gap, and still nothing is being done about it. So the Null curriculum. According to ESP in 1985, the Null curriculum refers to what has been excluded or omitted from the educational curriculum, including the absence of certain disciplines at specific educational levels. Now, the Biafran War qualifies as the Null curriculum because this is part of the history that has been omitted from the educational system in Nigeria. Why is this important? This is important because, it is going to be addressing real questions. How do we bridge this gap? This gap in society, what is the way forward? Do we think that by excluding the curriculum or topics from the Biafran War, does it help the nation at large? By addressing the root cause, can we find a solution? By educating ourselves about the issues that led to the war, how can we make the country better and move forward as a nation? How did the Biafrans contribute to this war? So these are some of the general questions that we, as a research, or rather the research that I'm going to be going into, I'll be looking into more of these questions. In current day Nigeria, this is what it looks like. There's a map of how it was before the war, and this is a map of what it is now. You can see that the eastern Nigeria is being shrunk into, one part of the country. And most people from the east would say that they are marginalized. How true is this? The aftermath of the war saw the marginalization of the Igbo people, and it continues and it's being felt even in today's world. So how do we move forward from here? What does education, what is the part of education in all of this? Why is it important to educate? Why is it important to be informed? I think that makes me clear. Thank you.
Okay. We have 30 minutes for questions. I can have all the questions over here. Or if you want, you can.
I think people can raise their hands and then look at people online.
Okay, but we have to respect 30 minutes. Okay. Please.
Thank you. So I just want to ask this, that I like this topic, and it's one of those we call a controversial topic in education. So you mentioned that this has, that starts of effects that, but you didn't mention, can you just give us the instances of effects that you feel the absence of this story of civil war has on Nigerians?
Yeah. Well, like you saw, I actually showed a map in the 8th slide. This is one of it. This used to be the map of Nigeria before the war, and this is what it looks like now. So if you notice, the eastern part now is just down there, boxed into a corner. That is part of it. This is number one. This is part of what the complaints are. Another one is when it comes to governance. The Easterners have been excluded from the governance of the nation. They are being seen as outsiders, saying, and most people feel that, or rather, most Easterners would feel that they're not being given a chance in a nation that is supposed to be, one here. While some Northerners may say that there's fear, there's tension. Like, I think that's what it is. There's a lot of fear, there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of uncertainty. Nobody really knows how to push forward. That's what it is.
Okay, so thank you very much for your presentation, and I'm going to make reference to this map right here.
Mm-hmm.
So the map that we have on the left was pre-Civil War, right? Okay, and this is post-Civil War, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what made the Igbo states being pushed down or probably recalibrated?
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps you should look into some other factors that contributed to that.
Mm-hmm.
Because while the Biafra War was going on, there were also ethnic minority marginalization going on. And this is not only the southeastern problem.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the map you have right here and you compare it to what you have here, lots of other states have been created out of the western region also.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing for the north, if only we have the complete figure here. So you should also look at the undertone of ethnic marginalization. And also because during this period, Nigeria was under military regime, and there were constant, agitation with regards to public administration. So they did, for instance, the Babangida administration wanted to lead as a military regime leader and also wanted to be democratic. So that kind of hybridization of that public administration made him do most of this thing. Though we can't ignore the fact that maybe the stories of the Civil War could partly be responsible, but we should not ignore that all of those was part of the
Sure. Yeah, that's very true. Yeah. That contributed to thing.
Okay. A comment and a question. A comment, I looked at a very similar issue, looking at the curriculum within some post-conflict societies, including Northern Ireland and Rwanda. So just if you need to expand your literature view, there's a lot on this topic pertaining to those places.
Wow.
Yeah. And then a question, you first mentioned something about how, I'm not sure, the difference between referring to it as the Biafran War versus the Civil War. I'm guessing says something about
it's the same thing. Yeah, well, it's the same thing. The Easterners would call it the Biafra War, but in Nigeria it's called the Civil War. Yeah, so that's what the
follow up
difference
on that. Do you have any idea of, if you look at the East versus the West, who would want this taught in schools? It's a central government resistant to this being taught, I guess.
Sure. Like, I think when I spoke to the professor, he was like, this is a topic that people don't want to talk about. So even though we can see, or even though the nation is aware that there is a problem, we know something needs to be done about this. But it's kind of, there's this underlying silence. Nobody wants to do anything about it because, the war was really bad. Nobody wants a second civil war. And even though people are not happy, but still, it's a dilemma. Like you're just in the middle of, you don't really know how to push forward with this. Yeah. So that's why I feel that a lot of scholarship should really start talking about, because the education part is really important. When people talk, it's just communication, educate. When I was speaking to someone here in the US and we're just discussing this, and she was like, "Oh, this happened like over 100 years." And I was like, "Really?" Like, that's to tell you how much, and this is a Nigerian, and this to tell you how much of lack of information is out there. And it's really been pushed to the
intentional.
Intentional. It's really intentional. Yeah, and I think it's a government strategy. I'm sure they mean well, but it's not working. So we need to look at another strategy.
That's my question.
Okay.
Have you looked
Yeah, I
at
have a question. Oh, sorry.
the non-curriculum,
Mhm.
which is omission from history
Yeah.
and other African experiences?
Well, not in other African experience. Funny enough, why I got interested in this topic was because I did something last semester on the Null curriculum and the 1619 project. So while I was doing that project, I was like, oh, this is the same thing that's happened with the, with in Nigeria, almost the same thing. When you're not talking about things, when people are not really educated, that kind of affects the whole. It has a ripple effect. It affects everything. Right.
Okay, I have a question. Yeah, thank you very much, Obi, for your work.
Yes.
Yeah, my question is, you seem to come to this research of knowledge on the topic,
Okay.
and you seem to have some positionality and subjectivity in it. As you are approaching this research, how are you going to be sure that these subjectivities and positionalities does not bias your finding?
That's a great question. Because the Biafra War, for those from the East, it's very it's an emotional topic. Sometimes when people talk about it, they tend to put their emotions into it. But the thing is, the Biafran War started because of something, or the Nigerian War started because of something. It didn't just start in 1967, like there's a history to that, right? And most of the people that participated in this war, most of them are still alive. So the right course would be, I actually got some questionnaires that I would like to send to the northern part, the western part, the eastern part. So I really want because it's about the nation. It's about moving forward as a nation. What should we do? How do we make sure that people are included? Just like when we are talking about African Americans here in the US, I don't know about having a stance, because these are what you can see. I mean, these are lived experiences of people. So that's basically what you're going to be standing on and moving with. It's not because I wasn't born before, so I really don't know. So what I'm saying is based on what I have read or what people have said or something. But for this research, I want to do more questionnaires. I want to do more interviews just to hear from primary sources.
We have another question. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. I guess my question is just about how do we actually get this out there to people? It's one thing to do research and find out from people who experience this war. It's another thing to actually get out to people, because it's silence culture, right? A lot of times, like, the only thing you only know is like, the Civil War happened, like that. Teachers in school, like, the Civil War, it was like 1967, 1970, like that's all. Like nobody knows the details. So even when we push for it to be included in the curriculum, I think it means two things. One, it means only people who are educated as well would know like the details. Secondly, it also means that people who would not like go to school would not know, right? Like if it's just beyond like, I mean, if it's just like within the 4 walls of school. So it's like, how do we push for, it to be something that everybody actually knows more? And how do we even, beyond the research, how do we let people, really understand like the weight? Because I think it carries a lot of weight, and like it's still really playing out in this present time. It's just like, how do we like really get this out?
This is a great question, and that's why I talked about education, not higher, but in the secondary and primary. most people in Nigeria, they attend primary and secondary. Some of it is free at the state level. So if we can have an inclusive curriculum that talks about not just oh, there was a civil war in this, and it talks about why this war happened. What was the underlying effects of this war? Who were those responsible? Who were those involved? Why were so I believe if these are taught from the primary schools into the secondary schools, then we would have a more enlightened society. Especially based on the fact that schools to secondary schools, the state level, are free in Nigeria. So most people will have access to that particular information. And I think and believe that when they have this information, that's how we put it into, that's how it goes into the society. In America here, we talk about K-12, because we know that K-12, when if it's there, then we're sure that almost the whole of America will be aware of the situation. So we'll just go through the strategies through the curriculum. That's why I try to highlight the importance of having this in the educational curriculum.
We have another question.
So thank you.
Yes.
I think if my brain says me right, it's not as if we do not have this in the curriculum. Yes, we have it because I read books about the Civil War and I was in primary school. Just that it was at the surface.
Yes.
So later, when I got to university, I read like 5 different versions of the story from different people. One of the most active participants in that war, the former Nigerian president, Siakpebru, wrote my command, and that also became a secular capacity. That means we have different versions of this same story. Now, since your focus is on curriculum, I would advise that you check what Obasanjo did in 1999, because history was removed from the curriculum, I think, in 1999 when it came back. So maybe you may want to look out for that document, and that was a report that recommended that history should be removed. So what are those?
History was actually removed, but it's back now. They just brought it back like this semester, not this session. So thankfully, they have brought history back. That's the thing. That's the thing. That's what we are talking about. What history? So that's part of the question. Whose history are we talking about? Whose history are we teaching? Whose history is who's speaking this history? Like, who's the person responsible for speaking the history? And that's why I insist on primary sources. Obasanjo was there during the war, so he can also give from his own perspective. I know that Siakpebru wrote a memoir. There was a country, and he gave also from his own perspective. And Chimamanda also gave like a history. She made a historialization. I hope I'm getting the word of half of the yes, half of the
Question?
and
Yes, we have another question, and then that's it.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's not necessarily a question, just it's pretty much
I got your report.
a suggestion.
Yeah.
Because I feel this research should essentially be based on because you're not dealing with the current observed reality. You're talking about the past. So you might want to look at historical analysis, like having access to archival collections. And I don't know if we have a perfect place on that.
The thing is, I read one article, and this particular the writer, he did that. He wanted to get some, historical.
Yeah.
He went to the archives. He went to the UK to see if he could get something, and they were like, "Oh, that he had to get like permission and all that." And one of the person they were walking off, he was like, "You shouldn't bother about that. Nobody's going to give him permission, like, to go and see what happened during the war." So that's kind in the UK. It's like, no, nobody goes in there. And then in Nigeria, these documents are not protected because they feel it's not important. because they feel this history is a history that they want to wipe out, and they feel the history should not be taught. They just believe somehow it will just disappear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because what I'm saying is because you're trying to, you're trying to re-examine what has happened in the past.
Mhm.
And the thing is, if you want to talk about, like say, research in social science and you want to engage, what's it called, people, it might not necessarily, because the question is, you're going to ask yourself, questions of principle, who are the target audience? Like, are you going to do the research on the basis of certain age grade? Let's say people who were born at a particular point in time, and having access to the supposed audience, it's a key thing. And that's why I feel that, for me, if you ask me, because I feel the research is essentially hinged on historical analysis. So for you to get a very concrete analysis of the arguments, you might want to look at archival collections. And I think a good place for it could be the NDA, Nigerian Defense Academy Archive in Kaduna. They have one, and the archive in UI again. I think they have all these. So it's a very
Okay. We have another.
I also think she could, coming from the other side, she could use both. She could use the historiography method and use the historical analysis, as you've mentioned, but then she can also leverage on primary data source from participants who have lived experiences. And that even makes it more authentic, because archival sources are written and archived, but these people have the lived experiences. So for her primary resources, she can use the lived experiences of the participants or the people she has mentioned, and also leverage on archival sources, and as well as secondary sources of current analysis of the happenings from current scholars. So I think you have a very good space to use, and you will have a lot of resources, like you mentioned, in the case of UK, in the US too, and also back home. And there are a lot of scholars, Amanda and others you have mentioned so far, having very good secondary sources. So you want to use all of these to make your work.
Other questions?
Yeah, I want to, it's not so much a question, and I know we're running out of time, but I think that what you have to consider is, what is the discipline that you're working in, and what are you trying to do in that discipline? Are you a historian? If you're a historian, then this is the kind of thing that maybe you want to do. But I thought you were working in education, and I thought that what you're interested in doing is looking at the process of the Null curriculum. So in that case, you're not going out to do the historical research. There's a number of different things you can do. It's a very interesting topic. One would just be, okay, what's in the textbooks? Is there anything that's in the textbooks about it? How does that differ across age group? How does it differ across particular kind of textbook? I assume that, I'm not sure what happens in the federalism of Nigeria. Each state has its own curriculum, or there's a national curriculum, or there's a public and a private
There's a
curriculum.
national, there's a state curriculum.
So one can look at the different curricula and compare them. Maybe the curricula in the North are different from the curricula in the East. They have different topics. That would be an example of doing an educational kind of study. You're not doing the data collection to find out what happened. You're doing the data collection to see how they're teaching about this thing. How, what is getting left out? That would be one possibility. Another possibility you mentioned is to do this survey that you're talking about. Ask people, what they know. Ask people, for example, this very interesting issue of how to call the thing. Do people really resist the construction of it as the Biafra War versus the Civil War? Or there can be other questions that you're interested in knowing. What, not here, the question is not how is the state constructing it, but what are the preferences of people about the kind of law. And finally, you could do something that's a little bit experimental. You could expose people to certain constructions of it and see how that impacts, or correlational. It wouldn't have to be experimental. You can see what they know and see how that is related to their beliefs about the separation of powers or the revenue from oil going to the central government. Some kind of issue that's related to federalism versus and the ongoing extraction from those areas as a function of what they know about the past. And you can, again, that could be correlational, you could measure them, or you could try to impact people's knowledge by an experiment to say, okay, you get this, now what does that do to, does this change what you think about Nigeria is doing? So I think it's interesting to do the project of looking at the historical knowledge too, but if you're thinking about your discipline and where you are, there are a lot of other interesting things that I think are good for you to be thinking about doing. So I hope next year when we do this, you present your work and we have like some interesting pilot data or initial data or even your instrument that we look at.
Thank you. One more question before we move to the second presenter. There is room for one.
Okay, Prof, like you made mention of like, I don't know if, you the one who said like doing research from the standpoint of historical analysis. But I want to know, like, the thing is, just look at the constraint, like you might actually be fraught with. And one of it is, like I said, the supposed audience. If you want to do a fieldwork, you're going to look at the timeline. Who are those, like the set of guys that, that were living at that point in time? So it's like, I'm just raising a suggestion, because if you want to do a fieldwork, you ask yourself this question. Who are my supposed audience, my target audience? Like, how do I reach out to these people? And if you want to fit in a good sense of unbiased, research, if you look at, you just need to consider the age, the people that will be involved. Like, how old are this guy? Because we are talking about 1967. I believe your work cut across education and the Nigerian Civil War. So the war kicked off in 1967, and who are those people? Like, that we can actually see that they've grown and they have great experience of what they encountered at that point in time. So
we have a lot of people that are still alive.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm just looking at how you can actually have access to these people and how the clear-cut communication with them. You understand? In order to see what happened, the information from you. That's why.
Yeah, just like Prof said, I want to go about this from the educational perspective.
Okay.
So even though I'm going to include like the history part, I still want to hear from primary sources.
Yeah.
But at the long run, like I want to know how we can include this into curriculum. I want to know what is left out. I want to know why what is left out is left out, how we can incorporate. Just in that angle.
Okay, thank you so much.
Email you.
We have the second presenter, Ernestina. You have 10 minutes presentation, and we have another 30 minutes for discussion.
Yeah, she can change.
I'll let you know.
Hello, can I go ahead?
Yes.
Hello, thank you very much.
Hear you.
We hear you. You're good. Go on.
Okay. So my name is Ernestina Wiafe, and I'm a doctoral student in Kansas State University. I'm presenting my ongoing research incorporating teachers in curriculum development for effective implementation, a sustainable approach to K-12 education in Ghana. So post-colonial governments have made efforts to introduce policies and curriculum in order to help develop the human resource or citizen race of Ghana. And all these ones points out to, are you hearing?
Yes.
Okay. So, and all these policies and curriculum that are developed in the schools for learning and training of these Ghanaian citizens are all pointed to the teacher. But where is the teacher's place is the question to think about. Following Hilda Taber's curriculum model, I seek to understand how teachers' involvement can help with longevity and effectivity of the various educations and interventions and curriculum developed, and also identify best strategies and practices for fostering collaboration between educators and other stakeholders to achieve sustainable and impactful outcome in Ghanaian K-12 education. To do this, I ask, what roles do teachers play in the development of curriculum currently in Ghana? What are the dynamics and challenges involved in integrating these teachers into curriculum development process to make successful implementation? How am I going to respond to these questions? I'm going to do this through a qualitative case study research following Hilda Tabe and following Bachetari and Yan. I would also employ a semi-structured 3 focus group interview of 10 to 16 teachers across the nation, which is hoped to get the data saturation that I need for the study. I would also employ document analysis method of previous curriculum and reforms and see how teachers' voice have been featured or how the curriculum value or show the teacher's voice in its preparation. I would use thematic data analysis following Bachachari, where I would find the themes following the emerging codes and patterns that developed from the data. This research is ongoing, and currently my preliminary findings shows that curriculum is handed to teachers. Teachers are not directly contacted in curriculum development. No training is given to the teacher, so the curriculum is given to the teacher to go to the class to teach, because it is assumed that they are trained teachers, and so they should be able to zoom in into teaching any new curriculum that passes. And then there is also late or no textbook available when this new curriculum are introduced. Thank you very much. I am hopeful that some questions will come up that will help me explain the research work more due to time.
Okay. So we can have general questions. Questions?
Thank you. This is an interesting study, and one that's very, I think, important. My question is about you're getting most of your information from teachers, and teachers may have a particular set of complaints or a set of issues. I wonder if you're also asking maybe people from the ministry or maybe like local, maybe principals or some other people to see what they're saying is happening. Maybe, you know, it's not to say that what they're saying is true. It's just to say that does the government think something is happening and the teachers are saying something else is happening?
All right, thank you very much. So my research specifically focuses on the teacher. And so I don't intend seeking perspective from people in administrative position. That's the first response I'll give. And the second response is the use of available documents that would show teacher participation and every other thing from the seat of administration who prepare those documents. I am interested in the teacher's work because as a Ghanaian myself, I come in with a positionality. I have taught in Ghanaian high school, and in our high school system, like you asked Obi, somebody asked Obi, is the curriculum developed by the federal government or the state government? So in the case of Ghana, the curriculum is a national one developed by administration and handed over to teachers to prepare their own classroom curriculum. And so in this case, it's quite difficult to get the government's perspective on what they have handed over to the teachers. And so if I find out from the teachers how they feel about what they are implementing, I believe that is going to help me get a good perspective for this research, and probably for future research, I would want to look at the government side of the perspective that will help me make a comparative study, including finding about the students themselves, how they feel, and how the parents who sponsor their children in school feel. The underlying factor is that the continuous change of government in Ghana informs the regular change of curriculum. And curriculum studies have shown that for you to be able to evaluate the impact and effectiveness of a curriculum on the populace or citizenry, it is important that curriculum is maintained over a period of at least 15 to 20 years. And so how the people feel about it, how the teachers who implement it feel about it, is my first step towards this research as I make progress with this research agenda.
You have another question, Ernestina?
Okay.
Ernestina, thank you for your presentation. My question is this. I want to believe that some of these policymakers of the state who determine what goes into the curriculum, some of them have a background of being teachers. Some of them are even retired teachers, retired school principals. Are you saying that they're not articulating the voices of present teachers? Because I want to believe that most of the stakeholders, these policymakers, cannot just consider people who have nothing to do with education. My experience in Nigeria, a couple of them actually have a very strong background in education. They're professional teachers, retired in some cases. So my question to you is, do you think they're not projecting the voice of the present teachers, the people who are practicing presently? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. If I have my preliminary findings up, and the second one says that teachers are not directly contacted, that means that that aligns with your points that you have raised. Most of these people who design the curriculum and make policy formulation are from the politicians. And sometimes you get a political person appointed who is not an educator or who is not an educationist. Well, you may have appointments of people on the board who are educators, but might have lost touch with current education trends. As a result, if the teacher is the one who is with the student, then they have the first-hand information of what is happening in the classroom. I have taught 8 years in Ghana, but have been in the US for 6 years. If you call me to give you my perspective on curriculum now, I am going to base my perspective on my past experience. However, the dynamics have changed, especially stemming from the happenings of COVID-19. How is teaching and learning being done now? You can only get that information from the teacher in the classroom. And that is why, even though technocrats and those who make policies might have had some background, some of them are disconnected with current system, and for curriculum to be implemented effectively, the current happening needs to be informed, needs to inform what policies or curriculum that are designed. And that is why I'm framing my research in the Hilda Taba model. That is the down-top approach instead of the top-down approach where curriculum is just handed to the teacher to go and teach, but then it should generate from the teacher in order to meet the current needs of the learners.
We have another question.
All right.
Yes, my question is, when you say curriculum, like, are you talking about a particular subject, or does it go through like all the subjects? What exactly?
Okay, so I said curricular development, and I mentioned that in Ghana, the curricular development is from the national level and handed down to the various schools, unlike what you mentioned about federal government giving an overview of what we have in the US, where there is a standard and then the states also have their own approach, and then the teachers have their own classroom approach. So when I mean curricular development, I'm looking at the whole national K-12 curricular development that directs education in Ghana. And that goes to K-12, meaning all subjects that are taught from kindergarten, all subjects taught from grade 1 to grade 12.
Okay, so it's all on all subjects, maths,
yes,
English.
all subjects at different levels. You know, the National Association or the National Board of Curriculum Development develop these curriculum. They make the syllabus, they make the textbooks, the readings, and everything. They even sanction which textbook should be used in the classroom and which one should not be used in the classroom. So I'm looking at all the subjects from K to 12.
And you know, if there is a reason for these actions or behavior, or is there anything behind? Why do they just choose without really knowing what? Do you think they're looking at the economy? Do you think they're looking at the society before they make these curriculums? What do you think they're looking at? Have you talked about that?
Well, as an emerging scholar in the field, and as somebody who is tilted to culturally responsive curriculum and gender responsive curriculum owing to the educational disparity in Ghana, I think that I have mentioned in my second slide that after post-colonialism, subsequent government are making effort to build an education system that would produce the human resource needed for national development. But my previous research has shown that there is a lot of disconnect between what the policy says or what the curriculum says and what it actually does. As a result, any government who comes thinks that when we do it this way, it will work better. Then the next government says, when we do it this way, it will work better. So even though it is in the interest of government to do this for the economic development and for human resource development, it's not ending so well. And I found the gap that it is not ending so well because the real implementers of these things are not involved in the process. And so my research seeks to find how we can bring them in and make appropriate policy recommendations for the government and education in Ghana.
We have another question from Elizabeth.
Yeah, my question is just about what you think about why these implementers aren't included. Why are they?
Please come again.
Speak louder, please.
Oh,
she can hear you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so my question is about what you think about why the implementers aren't really included. So if they are being handed the curriculum, they're not involved in the making. Do you think there's some justification for that?
Okay, thank you very much. I in my second preliminary finding, it has shown that the teachers are not directly contacted, which means that what I found out from my participants is that the teacher organizations like NAGRAT, National Association of Teachers, NAGRAT, National Association of Graduate Teachers, TEU, Teachers, Educators, Workers, those executive representations are those who go to sit down after governments have drafted the policies. In actual sense, in my opinion, I think that these people should first contact their teachers to hear from them what is happening before they meet government. You would, if you follow the political terrain of Ghana, you would know that most of these things are politically informed. And for some reason, if one party or a leader is not, you are, let me say, a teacher, or an area is known to be a new patriotic party, and an area is known to be a National Democratic Congress party, it is believed that the group that is an opposition is going to undermine government curriculum development. And so there is a political undertone. But I think that until we disconnect politics from education, which will be quite difficult, but we should find a fine line, we would have to be going back and forth. The first big step to take is to hear from the teachers in order to inform decisions. And the most important thing is that, change is very important. Change is very difficult. When you are used to a certain terrain and all of a sudden you are asked to change, you kind of lay back at some point. But if you are involved in the process, you owe the process. This is what we want to happen. Let the people who implement it owe the process, and they will give of the best to ensure the success of what is being brought.
Okay. Ernestina, another question on the chat. What is the motivation for imposing curriculum? Is it to achieve national outcomes across all the schools?
Okay, so there is a national curriculum to ensure that there is equitable education of all the Ghanaian K-12 students, so that what is taught in Greater Accra region, which is said to be the seat of government, will be the same thing as what is taught in, let's say, South Vogu in the Upper West region of Ghana, just to show uniformity. That is why it is that, so that when somebody from Accra has this competence, it is believed that another person in the remote area will have the same competence, just for the purposes of equitable education.
Another question?
Yeah, so I was, just to follow up on that, we know that curriculum making is a political process, because most times the governments, they want to, like the hidden curriculum, we know what we want to see in the society, we know the kind of society we want to create, so we make the curriculum in this way to achieve what we want to do. Including, like, you talked about including some teaching, some teachers' organizations, right? To that political process. But my question is, you're saying, before I ask my question, you're saying that teachers should be involved, right, in this process. Number one, are those people in those organizations, do they have like the teaching backgrounds? Are they teachers? Have they ever taught? And two, where the teachers that will be involved, from where? What part of Ghana? Is it all the teachers in Ghana, or is it going to be from a particular district? And don't you think that, when, I don't know how visible or how achievable that would be to include all the teachers in Ghana in this particular political process?
Okay, so thank you very much. First, I want to correct the point you raised that curriculum is political. In Ghana, curriculum is not political. Curriculum is independent of government. It is educational policies that is political. So I want to correct that. So the teacher organizations I've mentioned, we have the NAGRAT and the NAT, and teachers should belong to one of these two. I agree with you how tedious it will be to gather the many Ghanaian teachers to have their voices heard. And so their representatives are those who have to carry their voices to the seat when they go for negotiations on this essential topic. I did mention in my presentation that there is this connect between these bodies and their members. Instead of going to represent the voices of their people, they don't even talk to them. So what I found out from these teachers is that they want their leadership to talk to them and, if possible, have them represented, in the sense that it's not going to be district, it's going to be national. But each teacher body has a district, municipal, and metropolitan representation. So that is where the discourse will start from. And what each metropolitan or district say will be taken up to the regional, then to the national level. And that is how it's going to happen. Because you would agree with me that educational facilities are not common throughout the nation. When it comes to Africa, we have very deprived communities. I mean, not just in Africa, even in the US, it's disparately appropriated. But in Africa, it's worse, such that if somebody in Accra may not need a chalkboard, or may not need a textbook because they have access to internet and computers and libraries. However, somebody in, let's say, Volta region in one Biu community needs just a chalkboard. So it is the need of the people in the community that is presented to the discussion that will let the teacher's voice be heard in order for them to be able to teach what they are supposed to teach in a way that will help the children overall.
One
We have
comment.
time? Okay.
Yes.
A question is if you could talk a little about your data collection. So with your preliminary findings, I guess in terms of how many teachers, how many schools, are you looking only urban areas? And then, okay.
All right.
And plan the collection.
All right. Yeah. I'm trying to find the slide. Okay, so I hope to attain data saturation using 10 to 16 teachers throughout the country. Currently, Ghana is divided into 16 regions, so I'm hoping to have a representation at least from each part of the country for the starters. I don't know if I've answered the first part of your question.
Yes, that answers.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for your. And I think we are ready to hear the last presenter. Oh.
I have to run quickly to another meeting why I couldn't come in person. I truly apologize. And I'm happy to meet you all. Maybe next year we'll meet in person again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I missed that screen. Yes, so hi everyone, my name is Elizabeth Chunda. I am going to be talking about rebranding Pan-African movements, a deliberate initiative. Okay, so the Yeah, right. Okay, thank you. So the purpose of this paper is to examine the phenomenon of rebranded Pan-African movements and exploring the extent to which these movements are conscious of their transformation and evolution over time. And we'll also investigate whether movements are deliberately doing these changes, or are they aware, or they are just responding to the challenges that they're going through. So like socio-political context that they're living in. Then here I have a picture of the first Pan-Africanist, just to give an idea of what we're talking about. So we have the first picture there. The first person is Henry Sylvester Williams, and he is the first person that coined the word Pan-African. Then we have Du Bois there. The second person is Du Bois. The third person is Garvey. And the fourth person is Nkrumah. The first three were like from the African diaspora. Then Nkrumah is African, was from Africa. Okay, so in this paper, we're going to have an operational definition of Pan-Africanism. To some, it's a movement. To some, it's a sentiment. The people that came up with Pan-Africanism looked at it as a movement for African unity, to advocate for political and economic independence of African countries, to collaborate the African diaspora with Africa, see if we can bring the African diaspora back to Africa. Then when we talk about rebranding Pan-Africanism, what does it look like now? Because we're kind of like comparing different times. The following pictures will have many youth-related audiences or people in them, because those are the main pioneers of Pan-Africanism today. So there's rebranding through protests, movements, mobilizing. Rather than talking about riots or mobs, we'll talk about just people organizing and advocating for what they want, advocacy, yeah? And then we have the use of social media. That wasn't there in the 1900s, so the early Pan-Africanists couldn't use that. Then we also have setting agendas. We have two very active agendas right now. The 2063 agenda by the AU, and then we also have the agenda for the borderless Africa, which some of the countries in Africa have already started implementing this. Then we have the use of arts, culture, festivals to also rebrand. And then we have young people taking up leadership positions, like the two leaders shown in the picture. Now, so what are the motivations of rebranding? What causes this rebranding? Well, why are we going back into time and taking this notion and using it? So firstly, there's pressure for change. African youth and everybody else are living in a social political environment that they want to change. Then youth are also living in the consequences of the failure of the African unity that was supposed to be when Pan-Africanism started. And we also see that youth are looking to meet individual needs and collective needs. Then we also see that they're doing this because they want to claim their identity. They want to defend who they are. They want to be Pan-African. So the question is, who really is a Pan-Africanist? Because this word is being thrown around so much these days that we really need to understand, are we using it rightly? Is it really being used the way it should have been used? So there's a category of movements of activists who claim to be the movement, to be the Pan-Africanists. And then there's those that do not even claim to be Pan-African, but they're doing what the early Pan-Africanists did. So there's two categories of people. Those that are doing Pan-African work, but they don't say it, they're just doing it. Then there's those that are claiming to be Pan-African. Everybody today claims to be Pan-African. Most of everybody claims to be Pan-African. But do they really understand what being Pan-African is? And are they really being Pan-African? Then we also see a trend of imitating Pan-African leaders of long ago. You know, you see people more than ever now, they will quote Kwame Nkrumah. We see leaders that are literally imitating Thomas Sankara, like the two leaders that I had just shown there. Others will use Patrice Lumumba as an example of the change that they really want now. So those are examples of how people are rebranding. Then we also have a situation of using the word Pan-Africanism instead of pro-African, or any other word also, you know. So people use Pan-Africanism to just mean to be patriotic, right? To just say, to have a sense of identity or belonging. So Pan-Africanism will kind of fit in that area, but should it really, or should we change what it means now? Should there be a new word to describe what is going on now? Or we still maintain that Pan-Africanism has just changed shape? That is the end of my presentation.
Okay, questions? We have 30 minutes.
Thank you. I like that. And I want to start by asking you, what is your own definition of that Pan-Africanism? So, let me know what is your own definition? Because I don't know if Pan-Africanism has to be mainly African against the West or African against some other African. Okay, I don't know. Because we have some groups of people now, let me say, the youth in Nigeria, where some are engaged in Yahoo or something, and they said they are collecting what their forefathers. Yes. Oh my God. And it's a form of this because they are duping people online, trying to say this truth belongs to our forefathers. So they are collecting it. I don't know if that is also if this is also included in what so these are some of these controversies and actions.
Okay, so for me looking at what I think is Pan-Africanism, because I've been claiming it too. And then for me, it meant self-identity. It is who I am. Until one person said, I hate that word. And I'm like, why would you hate Pan-Africanism? And then they said, well, do you know what it means? It means this and this and this and this. And I'm like, okay, if we go back to the 1900s, to the 1970s, when Pan-Africanism was really established, it was meant for African unity, for collaboration between the African diaspora and Africa, and for the liberation of Africa. At that was the goal, right? So from the 1970s to the 2000s, we then moved from that goal, because now we had independence, and then each country was seeking to establish themselves. So we moved from being African unity, like we didn't really care what the other country in Africa was doing, but now we seek to like, okay, well, how are we going to develop our nation? So there now we have like, okay, I am Zambian first before I am African, you know? So then there's that self-pride. But then we go to the 2000s, and then now, more than being Zambian, I am African. You get, so that's how the identity really shifts. And then we also see that in the 1970s, that's when there was the creation of the Organization of African Union. And there was another set of leaders that advocated for that. When we move to the 2000s, then there's a rebrand to the African Union. Another set of leaders again, saying, can we just go back and do what they wanted to do? African unity is the key to like every other thing that we're going to solve.
Okay, another question.
Yeah, if we are to rebrand our Pan-Africanism, is it going to be different from the Du Bois Pan-Africanism or the Gavi form of Pan-Africanism?
Yeah, that's my question too. That's my question too with the research. Like that's the question that I'm asking as well. Like, what does it look like?
Okay.
These rebranding movements that are taking place now, that are rebranding, and then calling themselves Pan-African, are they really referring to what Pan-Africanism was? Or should we just create a new word for that? Yeah.
So it's sort of like a separate initiative, like you just want to like come up with something new. But the question we ask ourselves is like, what is the purpose of this very movement, the new form of Pan-Africanism? Because looking at what Pan-Africanism means, like we are talking about, these solidarity, dignity among Africans across, even in Africa and across the diaspora.
Yeah.
So we are aware that Du Bois is early proponents and Gavi, even if they have their own, ideological discrepancy. But I'm concerned about like, if we had to rebrand Pan-Africanism, what essentially are we looking at? Like, what do we want to talk about? Is it that the Pan-Africanism we were sort of like introduced to did not really offer much of when it comes to African cooperation? So we should be looking at what is the contribution? Like what exactly are we talking about? What do we want to achieve? What do we stand to achieve? What's the goal? When it comes to that rebranding, is it cultural reorientation, or maybe we are not like the people Africans in diaspora? They are not really representing Africa, like in the words of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, decolonizing the mind. So how do we all of these things? So I just want to know how what exactly we need to pay attention to.
Well, that would be going right back to the 1970s.
Okay.
If we want to rebrand Pan-Africanism, it's doing what they did.
Okay.
Seeking African unity. And then there was also that collaboration. Pan-Africanism was not started by Africans per se. It was started by the African diaspora.
Yeah.
And all the meetings were held by the African diaspora. Yeah. But what are they doing now? What is the African diaspora doing now, for that unity, for that oneness of the Black person, of the African person?
Yeah.
You see? So if we say we are doing this Pan-African thing, then what is the African diaspora doing?
Okay.
Yeah. So in rebranding, we might want to consider what is their role, and are they doing anything in helping us achieve Pan-Africanism?
We have one more question. Okay, one more question.
Yeah, amazing presentation. Okay, I think my question is, do you think Pan-Africanism is really still a thing? Like, if you look at the African continent right now, it seems like different countries are doing their own thing, and I don't know that I would say there's like a collective sense of identity where it's okay. And I'm an African. I mean, even some parts of Africa, for example, like North Africans will say, oh, they're not even Africans. Right? Like, so it's I get the idea of like Pan-Africanism, but I think my question is it feasible? Like, it seems something that, when we look at it on paper, it makes so much sense. But the actual like practicality of it,
Yeah, that's the thing. If we did Pan-Africanism, it would be feasible. It would work. Do you understand? So
I disagree because I think that people have like right now. I think maybe because like different countries obviously like puts their own like citizens' interests first. What they want, and like we have different countries that have like different spaces right now. Where some are like developing, some are like still struggling economically. Like it's like that's like the Pan-Africanism like the least of your worries when it's like high poverty rate, educational, like there's a lot of issues. And so it's like, yeah, on paper it seems like it's something that can work. Like, okay, yes, if we say we want to pursue Pan-Africanism for what's supposed to be, it can actually work. Like, okay, it means everybody in Africa has like this collective sense of African unity and all. I mean, even the AU is not even really functional. Like, so it's like,
they are functional.
Like it's not. Yeah. So it's like if we're leaving even that and then going to Pan-African. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not like, but yeah.
I understand. Yeah, well,
Maybe to add more to your point, looking at it from the perspective of people political, there are a lot of different ideologies within us. You could see people being sanctioned, and countries that are being sanctioned now beginning to form their own. Now, where do this reconciliation comes in, because nobody is ready to pay for the other. So, to back up that point, do you really think at this pace that we have, in this present century, is still visible to achieve that?
yes, I 100% think it's possible, and some of it is even happening now. Like I gave the example of like having a borderless Africa. Who would have thought we would have a borderless Africa? But it's something that it just started with one country, then there's two, then there's three, then now everybody is like on fire about it. So can you imagine what can happen if we start thinking in those directions? So I think it's really something that can work.
But looking at the reality,
What is the reality?
The reality countries are already forming alliance on their own. And ECOWAS is not ready to bend when it comes to political ideology.
Yes. Well, so ECOWAS can we look at it as an African, is it a Pan-African organization itself? When we look at having a Pan-African organization, the best example is the African Union, because it encompasses all these countries. In the beginning of Pan-Africanism, there was also that division. It has always been there. There was people like in Liberia, they want to form their own part this side, these guys want to do this, these guys want to do this. But then there was only one goal, and it didn't happen. It didn't happen then in the 1970s. So in the 2000s, people are saying, what if we go back to those notions? Do we think they will work? But that's not really what I'm researching on, whether it will work or not. My research is just like, what is this? What is going on? Are we really, if we are talking about, if ECOWAS saying Mali and Burkina Faso should not be part of,
not only ECOWAS that sanctioned them, even AU to sanction those countries.
Yeah, but I'm just giving an example. Like if they decide that, are we saying they are not being Pan-African? So that's my focus. Like, what is really Pan-African? Yeah. What is not Pan-African?
So my question.
Sorry,
Question was.
please, sorry, a quick one. Are we really looking at what's it called, Pan-Africanism within the global space, or just Africans for Africans? Is that what we're talking?
We are looking at Pan-Africanism when it started. It was global.
Okay.
Yes. So you see that question. The question you have asked is exactly what I mean. Like now we don't know. Is it global? Is it Africa? What are we talking about?
Is it Pan-Africanism with capital P or a little?
Yes, we don't know. So now we're throwing the word around. People are being sentimental about, no, that's Pan-Africanism should mean this, Pan-African. Exactly what you asked is exactly what I am trying to get at, is that we shouldn't throw the word around, but people do that. So maybe we should create other words for other things. That
we have one question.
That's my one question. I don't know, but Pan-Africanism, I'm a little confused. Is it brotherhood? Is that what it means? If that's what it means, then if that is the Pan-Africanism you're talking about, then I don't think that should be at the project, right? Mm-hmm. So what kind of what exactly do you mean by Pan-Africanism?
Okay, so by Pan-Africanism, I mean African unity. I mean collaboration between the African diaspora and Africa. I mean Africa's self-identity, right? And I also mean liberation of Africa. That's what it meant in the beginning. That's what Pan-Africanism means. So now we have different meanings.
So how does that go into what you want to do? Are you trying to look at how it binds us together, or are you trying to look at how we're connected?
No, that's not really my concern. My concern is just about if there are movements right now that are going back to that time and imitating what the Pan-African leaders did, is that really Pan-Africanism? Okay. So I'm trying to identify what is Pan-Africanism now. Okay. Are we really attaching it to the things that it should be attached to? Yeah. Should the word even still exist now, or should have just gotten rid of it because it's no longer, we're not using it, maybe.
Dr. Blaine has a question.
And my question is, again, getting back to the purpose of a graduate research workshop, which is to think about what is the kind of research that you're going to do. So you've described the topic, and that's good. And we have a lively discussion about the topic. But I think getting at your questions, like what, so you say part of what you're interested in is tracking the meaning of Pan-Africanism over time, and right now, maybe not even that, maybe just seeing right now whether, how are people using it, and is it embodying the ideals that people articulated earlier? So for me, then the question becomes, where are you looking to see how people are using it? What particular settings are you looking at? And maybe there, you mentioned some and you compare them. So maybe there are discussions of people online. You showed leaders. You said, okay, young people. There are young people leaders who are doing it, but that, I mean, you showed the coup plotters, right? Yeah. I mean, that's another word for them. That's another word for them, but
and the other word is leaders, right?
Yeah.
The best word is leaders.
So, but that gets at, there are maybe different articulations of them from different spaces. Maybe the youth who are on the streets for NSARS or other things that they're calling themselves Pan-African, maybe they're not, maybe they are. So my question for you is, where are you looking? And are you comparing how even today the meaning may vary in a systematic fashion? So you want to know what are the different ways people are articulating it, but it's also useful if you can say, yeah, there are these different ways and they come about because people are differently positioned, and maybe these people who are doing this is saying one thing. So you're explaining, not only noting the variation in the meaning, but also explaining or coming up with an explanation.
Yes, well, also, like when I was going through this, and I was like, yeah, I asked myself the same question: what am I going to do, or how would I approach this? And when I look at the first Pan-Africanists, it was easy to track even what they're doing because each individual had their own train of followers. Each individual had their own things that they were doing, so it was easier to track individuals. But right now, it's a little bit hard to track like individuals and their followings. But it will be easier to track youth-led movements or just movements in general. But I'm going to focus on the youth-led movements, seeing as the youth, when I was coming up with this, were the most involved. So I'll just basically be looking at youth-led movements in the political space, in the socio-economic space, and try to see if I can get something from there. I'm also looking at the online space because it's now a rebranding strategy is what I think it is right now. So I'll be looking at those two spaces.
So what's your method of research?
So for this one, for what I did here, I was just observing, right? And just like checking with youth-led organizations. I plan on having some interviews with them, you know, the ones that claim they are Pan-African, or the ones that don't claim, but if in the observation they come out that, okay, these seem to know what they're doing. Yeah.
Other questions? We still have 5 minutes before the break.
Maybe so kind of wrap up my thoughts around discussion and the last point mentioned. Perhaps Pan-African as a concept could also doesn't necessarily mean we agree in ideology, could also necessarily mean we agree in politically and all other aspects. However, we know that we could have cordial relationship even in our disagreements, even in our differences in perception or in other aspects. So I think that was just like a wrap up thought.
What other theories that serve as a background for your research other than Pan-Africans? Because it rebranded, it makes me think about media, theories from the media,
True.
Branding,
Yeah, I know. But I don't have any, I haven't really looked at
I think
any.
the media too is a really very important one, because sometimes the perception or the way the media presents Africa is also important. So if you can, you can use the media too for that, that's also part of the Pan-African, like if that is actually what it is. That's part of it.
Do you see Pan-Africanism and nationalism, African nationalism, as a similar thing? I'm thinking partly this comes, the question, my train of thought is going from this idea of rebranding. To some extent, you're interested in how people are rebranding Pan-Africanism. But it's also the case that people are rebranding themselves by appropriating the label as Pan-Africanism. So we can think about the young leaders that you mentioned who may be rebranding themselves as Pan-Africanists to get some legitimacy among a certain people. And then I was thinking about people like Mobutu Sese Seko. Is he a Pan-Africanist? Because he changed his name from Joseph Mobutu to, and he tried to appropriate a certain kind of presentation of himself and rename the country, right? Now that you might say is not Pan-Africanism, that's African nationalism. That's why I was thinking about the difference between the two. You see other people, it's like Blaise Compaoré. Is he a Pan-Africanist? Yeah, Sankara was. But then when Blaise killed him, is he still Pan-Africanist, even though he's like coming out there?
Question? One more question.
No, I think it's what Glenn is talking about is good and correct, but I think it's time and place.
Yeah.
And it's I mean, place is very important. Because Nyerere would be considered a Pan-Africanist, at least on the continent, but not necessarily international the way that Pan-African is used. He's locking up, of course, his most vocal Pan-African socialist, right, in Babu. And so it's the context, and I think that's what Elizabeth is trying to get to. So I think it's important that we look at time and place, and Mobutu would be considered a Pan-Africanist to the world at a certain time.
Yeah,
but a nationalist at other times, and then towards the end of his life, very much a nationalist and not a Pan-Africanist. Right. So again, it changes over time, which goes back to that classic George Sepperson, the people who've done this with me in class, that whether it's a capital P or a lower P, and what does that mean, and those notions. So yeah, good.
It's just time. One more question before we close.
I just like a question, just like a question or comment. So I didn't need to percent, but I want to ask maybe there is a situation like AU 2063 agenda in your work, but I believe that AU 2063 has some element of yeah, AU 2063.
I know there was something you did.
Vision 2063.
I don't know if okay.
Yeah, so those are the major, most happening things that people are owning up to. The Agenda 2063 is written as a Pan-African agenda. They write it themselves. They say this is a Pan-African agenda. This is how we set to get to our goals. And then there's also like people just owning up to it and saying, because I'm Pan-African, this agenda is really for me, so I will do this, I will do that. So definitely, it's like one of the most topest documents that I reviewed. Yeah.
Other